Welcome back to Highly Respected. I'm your host, Scott Greer, and today we're, of course, having another incredible episode. And we have a special guest on. I've been wanting to have an update about Ukraine. Like, what the hell is happening there? I first went to Highly Respected's foreign correspondent, Liam Strumpet. I was like, hey, do you want to do a segment on this? And he, went crazy. He's like, the Moscoli are fleeing back to Moscow. And he was, saying, Hail Azov. And, he was, promising that Kiev and Rus has been restored, and now Kiev, as we all want to know, now rules all over Russia. And I was like, I think Liam Strumpet has been taking some Ukrainian psychedelics. So we're not going with Liam Strumpet. We're bringing back on our good friend Irkutyanin to tell us what's been happening in Ukraine and Russia. So Irk, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Scott. I'm glad to be back on because there's been a lot of stuff that's happened. And this is, of course, Dien Pobedy. It is Victory Day, and there is a lot of things to update on.
Yeah, and I think the first thing we want to talk about is that in a lot of Western media, we've been hearing that Putin has got an evil plan for Victory Day. And Victory Day has come and passed, and he did not use nuclear weapons against Ukraine, as all these people were promising. Did Putin say anything interesting in his Victory Day speech that should be notable to Western observers?
Yes, actually, there's actually, in fact, it's kind of what he didn't say, because it's not just the nuke thing that got disproven. It was, there's other things that were floating around. Russia's going to issue a official declaration of war, which would mean that they would start using things like Strat bombers and heavier equipment. No war was actually declared in the Victory Day speech, right? Like no official state of war. And also, people have been thinking that there's going to be this massive mobilization and call up, right? There was even stuff like yesterday on Telegram about people were writing in they had a draft card from 2021, right? And they used a pen to mark over to, right, to say, oh, there's going to be a new draft. And no, that didn't happen. There's been no call up for mobilization or anything like that within this speech. But there is one thing that's interesting. Inside the speech itself, there was actually a mention of Kharkov, right? And the battles of Kharkov in the Second World War, which I think that implies that...
You're supposed to be calling it Kharkiv? What are you doing here? You're committing a cultural oppression, Irk. What are you doing?
I know, the eternal Ukrainian city of Kharkiv, I've committed a microaggression against. I've dead named it. Yeah. But, the thing about it is that... because he's mentioned that in his speech, I don't think that it's going to be ignored in the future. Because there's no reason. I mean, one of the things I've thought could happen as an outcome to this war is that the Russians will accomplish what they're going to accomplish in Donbass, and then just say, oh well, that's enough for us. We have a corridor to Crimea now, and we have all of the territory that seceded in 2014. So that's mission accomplished, right? That's been the sort of more realistic, pessimist version of what Russia is trying to accomplish. But this explicit mention of Kharkov, I think, does indicate that eventually they probably will turn their attention to that city. And I mean, it makes sense because there's a lot of stuff that it's sort of the major hub of Eastern Ukraine, and until 2014, I mean, most people would have considered it like a part of the Russian linguistic and cultural sphere. So that was an interesting bit of it. But besides that, it's really been like everything like that Putin could have escalated in this speech, but didn't do. Right, that's been the bigger piece of news that's come from this. Otherwise, team not happening has definitely won this time around.
Yeah, they keep winning on a lot of fronts with going into Ukraine. I guess now we can switch gears to the battlefield because I mean everyone predicted that there's going to be this big event for Victory Day, and as you said, team not happening was right versus team happening. Now, what's going on the battlefield? If you're listening to Western media, you know, you've been hearing like Ukraine has been kicking ass and killing tens of thousands of soldiers, and all the Russian military is about to mutiny, and it's over for them. And even guys who are on the ground, like this German reporter Julian Rupke. I'm probably mispronouncing his name a little. Rupke. It's a little bit weird.
Jihadi Julian from the Syrian war. He was a FSA.
Call him Julian.
Yeah. We used to call him Jihadi Julian because he was pro FSA, but he's kind of taken a different line this war. It's kind of been, but anyway, yeah.
Yeah, he's up there, and he goes back and forth between he's probably a little bit more accurate than most Western media because they're not there and they're just taking straight propaganda from these Ukrainians to like, wow, grandma just mowed down 30 Russian soldiers, and then MSNBC is like, well, we 100% believe this. Well, this guy's like on the ground, and he goes back and forth between like saying the advance is going well or for Russia and versus they now have these kamikaze drones that are destroying Russia. So what's really happening on the Donbass front? You know, the Russian soldiers, the last time we were, I think Highly Suspected was talking about that, Russia still had soldiers around Kiev. We're going to call it Kiev on the podcast. And they moved him around, but it appears that there's advances going on Donbass front. So what is happening with the advances on all fronts, and how long? And also in a second one, how long can Mariupol? I'm of course mispronouncing this. I'm going to just call it Mariupol, in proper American English. How long can that hold out? I mean, it appears that it's Azovstal is not going to be lasting for much longer.
I've heard that there's been some like food exchanges for prisoners, like from like civilians that were there that were negotiated. The thing is that there's not really an operational or tactical like level chance that they can really break out of Azovstal and then like somehow march like an increasingly like numerous amount of miles to the front line in this breakout. So it's really kind of just a question of like, how long are we going to be doing this siege? And I think that's the real question with Mariupol and Azov, because the city of Mariupol itself is it's clear, right? And they've been like cleaning up things that have been like like just the debris and everything like that. That's been most of the footage that's come out of Mariupol. They even had like a Victory Day parade with like a kilometer long St. George's ribbon, right? The orange and black one. As for like the Donbass overall and like Ukraine, I think this is a very different war from the one that started, in that we won't exactly be able to know what the reasoning behind the initial Russian actions were. I think that like their first plan was that they'd roll in and just everything would come apart. I think. That said, they're back then it was like about like moving convoys across like all these towns and trying to take as much territory as possible in a brief amount of time. Even then, I think that there definitely was a sort of hesitancy to completely surround Ukraine surround Kiev, and we who knows what the actual intentions were. But I think that initially it was about trying to sort of decapitate the political leadership of Ukraine, and at the same time, the southern front, where they captured where they captured Kherson, and then established a connection between Crimea and the Russian mainland, was the biggest sort of permanent strategic thing that's come out of that phase of the war. As we've moved away from that, the war's become very different in Donbass, because Donbass is very fortified. They've built up all of these layered trench systems and positions behind positions, lines behind lines. And the Russians have been using a lot more artillery in this theater. It's been more about destroying these positions with artillery and then advancing after they've been softened up. It looks a lot more like World War I combat than what we saw in the first couple of weeks of this war. And the Russians have a pretty good artillery branch in their army. So it's really been like about bombarding these positions inside of Donbass and fortified positions until they break or run out of men, and then they come into these areas. Like a few days ago, one of the big ones, Popasnaya, which has this, it's like in the highest point in Donbass, and it's or higher than the ground that surrounds it. And it was built up as probably one of the most heavily fortified regions of the front line. It's been a place that fighting has taken place since the beginning of the war, and that fell, which has made the remaining Ukrainian positions in Lugansk Oblast very difficult. It's going to make them very difficult to maintain, because now, there's complete fire control over the Ukrainian capital of the Lugansk Oblast, Severodonetsk, and Lysychansk. And there's been an interesting sort of correlation that's happened. There's been reports, of course, we'll know if they're correct in a little bit, but of the regular Ukrainian army pulling back units from this area, but the National Guard units, Aidar and Donbass, are still in the city. So we could have a situation where, kind of like how Azov got into Azovstal, and that's kind of been a speculation point about Ukrainian politics in general, is that maybe Ukraine wanted this war to happen so it could bleed the National Guard to death as a political force, because they've been the ones who have been more militaristic and insistent on conducting the war in Donbass to a victorious conclusion. And if Aidar and Donbass get surrounded in their positions in Lugansk Oblast, without having the level of Ukrainian support that you would expect them to have, or without the Ukrainians telling them to evacuate with the rest of the force to a more defensible position, I think you can definitely say that that's been, if not a completely intentional goal of the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, then it's certainly a happy coincidence for their force, because it's like these guys are the ones who've dictated the political terms of the war to President Zelensky, and they humiliated him when he visited them, and they basically told him that they could replace him when they wanted, or like they say in their memoirs and books that once the war in Donbass is over, we're going to bring the revolution to Kiev, right? And so, I mean, that's one of we might talk a little bit about memoirs and primary sources that are on Donbass, but one of the main ones for the Ukrainian side right now on Amazon is by an Azov political, like someone who joined the Patriot of Ukraine militia, which was part of the Social National Party of Ukraine.
Very creative name. I wonder what it was named after. I wonder what famous party they were trying to evoke with that name. I just can't think of it.
It's a mystery. I think really when you hear the name of the memoir and its author, Valhalla Express by call sign Voland, I think that leaves a lot open to interpretation. But
yeah, I agree.
But it's he has the picture on it is literally the Volkswrangel with Voland in a mask with
a mask. Yeah, it's very very good. I wonder what optics it's trying to evoke there. Continue about the memoir.
Yeah, like he talks about that particular militia was actually built because of these foreign student violence, like sexual violence, rapes that took place in Kharkov, and eventually it got a more serious anti-Russian bend before Maidan, actually.
And to back up, the author of the book is from Kharkov, correct?
Yeah, that's right.
And he's basically saying that this movement, because I think Nemitz, when he was on here, our good friend Nemitz was pointing out how a lot of these guys who are in Azov and I think the RWA guys also mentioned this, that they're primarily from the Russian eastern part of Ukraine versus more the traditional Ukrainian nationalists who are from Western Ukraine and Lviv. But they're all in Kharkov, and that is an interesting sign because that's also where the we'll call them the patriotic black metal bands. They all come from Kharkov as well, and it's very weird that you have this thing where as you're talking about that Kharkov would traditionally be in the Russian zone. A lot of those people there would have been, their grandparents would have probably fought in the Soviet army during World War II. They were not the collaborationists, but then all their grandchildren are starting black metal bands that are evoking Valhalla and optics maybe their grandparents would have fought against, and that the real hardcore of Azov came from these territories you would have traditionally associated with the Russian part of Ukraine. So that's something interesting. Sorry to interrupt that.
No, that's fine. It actually gets to a point I wanted to talk about Kharkov a little bit. That's actually where National Bolshevism, one of the creator of National Bolshevism, Edward Limonov, came from as well. And it was also one of the core areas of a phenomenon in the 1950s and 1960s USSR, the Stilyagi, right? Which were kind of they were like hipsters of their time that tried to imitate American greasers, right? Very strange movement. But I think that in particular after independence, you could say that the sort of Soviet nostalgia or Sovakism was particularly weak in an independent Ukraine, which shared its state with Western Ukraine, which had a much more intense feeling of nationalism and sort of separation from general quote unquote Soviet or Russian culture. I mean, they hadn't joined Russia ever really. They were only taken by the Soviet Union in the 30s, and so when the Soviet Union sort of fell apart, I think that in particular, and this is something that comes out even in this memoir, is that there just basically wasn't anything to identify with, right? Like there wasn't anything there. It's not like Russia made claims on Kharkov before this war happened, or like before there was like a minor attempt to create a type of people's republic that was similar to Donetsk or Lugansk. So there was no like official like Russian state-backed like movement to make Kharkov a part of Russia again. So I mean, like people kind of just they gravitate to where the power and where the strength is, right? And I mean, that was in Ukraine, there's such an absence of that it becomes like, this irredentist form of Ukrainian nationalism, even though the area that Kharkov is in, really wasn't a part of any of these even minor attempts to create a Ukrainian state. Like you could say, the Cossacks were there in the Hetmanate, but like Kharkov wasn't a part of the Hetmanate. It was in the Slobozhanщina, right? And those areas remained loyal to Russia during, most of the Cossack revolts that actually happened in history. And they were against the Mazepites, right, which happened during the Great Northern War. So there's really like even less of a precedence for this radical stuff, and even the people who like even Voland who's adopted this sort of Ukrainian nationalism, he doesn't write in Ukrainian, right? Like they found copies of his books everywhere, and it's always in Russian because that's the language he knows, right? It's a very interesting scenario that if we had a little bit more nuance in our coverage of Ukraine generally, it would be kind of like an interesting phenomenon to go of, because it's like a really great cultural alienation that becomes something real, that becomes even like a political militia movement. Uh, Very strange genealogy when we go on there. It's definitely, I would say that the Russian state is probably as guilty as the lack of a Ukrainian one for kind of making these people, because they just never cared about them, like after 1991 until this current era.
Interesting. And do you think I've suggested this theory throughout the war, and you were alluded to it in one of your previous points, is that it is to Zelensky's benefit to get rid of these militias, and we're seeing this with Azov. They're surrounded. It looks like there's still remnants of Azov elsewhere, but the majority of it's not going to be existing much longer. And all these other nationalist militias that are in the Donbass facing off against the Russians, while he's pulling back his actual armed forces. Do you think what do you think as this will mean for the future of Ukraine and Ukrainian nationalism if all these nationalist militias are effectively wiped out by this war, while the armed forces are there, and they get more, and Russia gets more of the land out of whatever peace deal might emerge?
Yeah, it's a big question, because it kind of depends on where the Russians stop, which is a very big question going forward. The main area that Azov is still concentrated in, or where they've received more volunteers, is around Kharkov, right? And they've even launched like attacks on Russian positions that are around Kharkov that have been successful. These areas have like additional Azov units and additional like right-wing militia groups. And then there's garrisons in Odessa and Dnipropetrovsk, which is in the south. It used to be called Ekaterinoslav, and now it's called Dnipro, I think. These areas have additional National Guard units that are outside of Donbass, but the majority will probably be wiped out in this in the next couple of phases of this Donbass fighting. Even if Russia halts after it reaches the borders of the oblasts that it's recognized the independence of, even if they stop in that territory, Ukraine has lost quite a bit of important territory, which includes a lot of its coal reserves, a lot of its power stations, a lot of its legacy Soviet industrial infrastructure, the mouth of its biggest river. If they go beyond that, if they take the entire Black Sea coast in later parts of this war, Ukraine's going to be pretty impoverished. I mean, most of its national industry is going to be severed. And, without a nationalist, legacy or discredited because they've lost the war, I think you'll end up seeing a lot more of a, kind of direct puppet state of the remnant of Ukraine. How much of one you see will kind of depend on how clear it is that, the irredentist side of Ukrainian nationalism has been sort of rebuffed by losing the war. Which, I mean, it can depend on a lot of internal factors, but I definitely think that Ukraine's going to be in a lot worse position. There's maybe up to 11 million people who've left Ukraine right now, and birth rates weren't good before the war either. So you're looking at basically kind of a hollowed out country where they're going to work as the lower level of labor in Western Europe or even Poland, right? Where they're going to occupy the jobs that people in Poland have left to other countries to do. So I think the overall picture of a post-war Ukraine looks fairly bleak, even under a government that sort of retains itself and isn't, replaced by something else. If the people who've led the country since Maidan are still in power, they're just going to double down on the neoliberal world, I believe, and they won't really have to contend with this large militarist section of their society that was sort of inadvertently created in their seizure of power in 2014.
Okay. And do you think that there's any chance that Russia loses the war, as at least the Western media is claiming?
It's going to be really hard for them to do that when they don't have when the Ukrainians don't have a military that's truly capable of large scale offensive operations. There's always the thought that maybe they'll get something that will stop the Russians at some point along the front, or make them go the retreats around Kharkov that happened recently, were on the other side of the Severodonetsk or the North Donetsk river, and these positions were kind of exposed, and they weren't good ones to hold under the North, but still they were pushed back a little bit. But I don't think that this is a readily replicable formula across the Donbass front, and I don't think that the Russians will give up the area of the south now that they've occupied, because they've done things restore the Tsarist era emblems and heraldry of of Kherson Oblast, right? and they've put in like monarchist nationalist as like the police chief of like another oblast, right? Who like who talks about, you know, like extreme, like I mean, like basically the inverse portrait of some of these Ukrainians, like the Russian nationalist vision of like Shulgin and people who were in the sphere at the early 20th century. So I don't think that Russia will lose the war militarily. You know how well, I mean, and that's the biggest question of where Russia stops, because if Russia like doesn't go to like Kharkov, or they don't go to Odessa or Nikolaev, right? It'll be very hard for them to sell this war domestically as like a real win, right? Depending on how much of Ukraine that they do take, or like however far they do Russian defeat is that, you know, there to be some sort of revolution in Russia that overthrows Putler and establishes that's not really in the realm of plausibility.
Speaking about the long goals, I mean, that can make of America that they're trying to claim credit for these assassination of Russian generals and the sinking of the Russian battleship, as well as, do you think, and the second part of the question is, do you think that America will allow Zelensky to make a peace deal? I mean, there was a recent speech, I think over the weekend, where Zelensky was preparing his people for that they're going to concede a lot of land, where he's saying, well, we may give up some land, but it will make us stronger in the end.
Yeah.
Is that giving up land is not a defeat. And I guess you could, that's one way of saying it. So what do you think of those two questions, like of American involvement, and do you think America will allow Zelensky to make a peace deal?
Yeah. I mean, there's also been like a lot of American volunteers that are kind of transparently like quotation marks like ex-military that have been like involved too. A couple of them have gotten injured. You know, it's kind of funny because America like gave thousands of and the rest of NATO gave like thousands of anti-tank, anti-armor munitions at the beginning of the war, because the war was highly mobile and reliant on like armored movement. So, you know, in a lot of the captured munitions that you see on like Telegram, there's like, you know, hundreds of these, you know, javelins and in-laws and Panzerfaust 9s and that sort of thing like that. You know, as the war has changed into these artillery duels, they've realized that the Ukrainians don't have enough artillery. And, you know, recently the entire media push has been, oh, we're going to supply them with, you know, 155 millimeter like howitzers and self-propelled guns. And it's like, you need to train people on those, and then you need to send them over. And like when you send them over, you have to get them on rail lines and take them, you know, to the front. And then when you get to the front, you need to deploy them to the front, and you don't have like air cover like as soon as you get into like Ukraine. So you know, I think also that American military contractors are using this point to clear out like excess stocks of equipment so they can sell more in like newer equipment to the U.S. Army afterwards. Like there's really no reason for us to ever send the M113 to Ukraine, because it sucks. I mean, like it's not.
What would that, for the listeners who may not be familiar with what that is, what is that exactly?
It's a track vehicle that was used in Vietnam, and we would call it, you know, it was like an APC, armored personnel carrier, and we used it in Vietnam. It has aluminum skin. It gets 3 miles to a gallon. And
let's go. That would be great for gas prices now.
Well, I mean, like you're also in Ukraine, right? Which has had its oil refineries blown up and gets like, it's like it's so absurd, like because it can't take direct fire, it can't really deliver troops, it doesn't go fast, it like has a max speed of like I think like 60 kilometers an hour, just a little bit over that.
We
And I'm
use
like,
miles per hour in America, so I don't even know what the hell kilometers per hour mean. This is what the hell kind of Euro poor nonsense is this? We only see miles here and inches. I don't know what the hell type of metric system is going on over in Europe, but
well, yeah,
it doesn't sound very fast in my scientific estimation.
no, it's not, and it's like outclassed in every single way by like a Toyota Helix pickup truck. Like it's it's sort of bad. It's kind of like almost an insult that we've delivered these things just to get rid of, just to empty up space in the motor pool, right? Like they should have just sold these things to like rednecks to go mudding in. Like,
Let's go. Well, I think, and that's the same with like Germany. It's like I think they've been news reports because they always like complaining about Germany, what they're giving, and like half the like most of the shit that Germany's giving the Ukrainians, like none of it works like at all. Not only is it bad, it's just like doesn't work at all. It's like completely rusted.
yeah. But in regards to the second question, will we allow Ukraine to make a peace deal? And at this stage, I would say no. Um, at least as far as like events on the ground go, I think as the losses of the Ukrainian military become more like irreplaceable, and the sort of balance of forces just becomes like untenable, then we'll push very hard for like the Russians to end the war before they take uh, enough territory to make Ukraine like completely unviable, or just like the Galician areas of Western Ukraine. I think that um, once they're out of Donbass and into like secondary or tertiary operations around Kharkov or Nikolaev or so on, there'll be a very big push to try to end the war before Ukraine loses everything. But I don't think that we're going to do that until basically we fought until the last effective Ukrainian. That's been a phrase that's been used a lot, fighting to the last Ukrainian. But, you can't really fight to the last Ukrainian if the Ukrainians start just giving up or like mutinying as soldiers. So at that point, it's like you've reached the last Ukrainian.
And
And
I've been seeing some
that.
clips of this. I don't know how. I mean, like it's hard to learn what's accurate in Ukraine, but I think it was. I don't think it was I don't think it was a militia. I think it was a part of the regular army
Yeah.
that this like battalion or regiment was like saying like we're not getting any supplies. We're tired of this shit. We're ready to give up. Do you think that there's a lot of units like that, and that's more prevalent among the regular army versus the militias? Going to be Azov is still like they're starving
Yeah.
in their factory
And
and
they're
they're still
still
not giving up.
fighting. Yeah. With the regular army, you have a problem with the officer class, because I don't think that Ukraine had really trained up a real like officer corps. Like even in like Yahoo article like that was a few days old, they were talking about this one unit that was rotating out, and it was like it was a cadet that was leading 300 men, right? He had been pulled out of the military school to lead an actual combat unit, and it sounded like they got like hit by artillery really bad, and he didn't really have that much control over the men. And it seems like that there's been at least some of the educated officer class that's like just up and left their units, just like leaving them on the front because they have an education, they can go somewhere else. um, I think that's been a case in a few units where you have the officers ordering them into these positions or assaults, and then they get beaten off, and then like the soldiers are very I mean, that there's been like reports in Ukraine, like even Zelensky has said, there's people who are calling their wives and girlfriends, and they're being like psio papala, like everything's gone to shit, right? And I think that's a result of this lack of officer corps. And recently the videos that have come out, and again, like it's hard to verify these things 100%, have been from the 79th, right? Which they claim is taken like 2/3 of their original, their original strength. They've lost 2/3 of it, and that's why they've made the video. But they're the ones who guarded the area of the North Donetsk River that the Russians are actually crossing now. So they might have been. I mean, that might have been real, because these positions are being like left behind. There's either not enough men to hold these positions on the North Donetsk, or they've just kind of given up about that. And it's really hard, especially under this type of sustained artillery fire, to keep up unit morale if you don't have like an officer and NCO corps that's like motivated to fight these things. And that's what the National Guard units had over the regular army, is that it's not just the officer or the NCO class of these like militias that are motivated to fight. It's like everyone, right? Because everyone's a volunteer and like basically a political ideologist, right? Whereas like these guys who are coming in have been like mobilized from their regular jobs, and they're not, or they've been conscripted to begin with, and they're not really led well, and there's all sorts of things that go wrong in these types of armies, or these types of units, that can affect morale and sort of collapse a unit, that you don't see in these volunteer groups. So I think as the situation worsens for these types of units, there's going to be less of a resolve to really fight in the conditions they're fighting in, which is just getting blown to hell by artillery like every hour of every day, and trying to beat off the eventual assault that comes. I think the Russian way of doing the war right now is very attrition heavy for the Ukrainian side. And there's not a single territory, like area right now, I think, in Donbass that's like free of their artillery range. So it's like, if Ukraine just keeps feeding people into this into these like salients, and not really concerning itself with like how well these positions are doing or how viable they are in the long term, and only is like concerned with the political face of, say, losing Severodonetsk in the short term or midterm. When they do eventually fall, they'll have a lot worse domestic situation on their hands with regards to the regular army.
Interesting. So, and I guess the way to wrap this up is to conclude is there is American involvement in the war. It's they're not doing a very good job of hiding it. America is not going to let Ukraine surrender until it turns out Russia is going to take way more territory than the Western media even think it could even comprehend that they're going to take, and it's more to save some rump state of Ukraine to survive, that they'll make a peace deal. And the war is not going the way Western media is claiming it is with Ukraine, as I always see David from like snarky, really smug tweets about how Russia is losing. And so you would say that all those are accurate observations of what's happening on the ground level in Ukraine.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. And that's a great way to conclude this first part of the episode. We're going to have a second part with no Irk, because it's topics that are not dealing with Ukraine and such on the second part, and we'll move along to that. But thanks again, Irk, for coming on. We need to have you back maybe when Azov is about to take Moscow. We'll ask for your opinion about how wrong you were. So we'll wait till next time. Anyway, if you have anything to promote for all the viewers to sign up for or to follow along, make sure you shoot it out right now.
Okay, yeah, I do have one thing. our good mutual friend Peter Nimitz has completed his translation of a book that deals entirely with the origins of the First War. It's called 85 Days in Slavyansk, and he translated it from Russian. It was written by a man called Alexander Shuchkovsky, who was a volunteer in the First War and was in Slavyansk for this second one. And since the Russians are fairly close to Slavyansk, and even in parts of the battlefield that were occupied during the First War, I definitely recommend that you guys check that out, because it is a very important piece of information that has come out from our side, that's been entirely done without any it's entirely like a product of basically our side of Twitter. So definitely support that.
And it's selling much better on Amazon than the works put out by the globalist on the topic.
Central European University.
Much better, as Irk and Nimitz and other people are pointing out. So that's something to be happy about and white-pilled about. So thanks again, Irk, for coming on the podcast.
All right. Thank you, Scott.
You're welcome. Now on to the second part of Highly Respected today. Might be a little slight change in recording quality, because record a little bit different with solo versus when I'm talking to guests on here. So if there's a little bit difference, that's why. So for the second part, as I said, it's going to be pretty much all cognitive elite questions, because we got a lot today. And as a reminder, you too can get the power to ask me questions or suggest guests and topics if you sign up for the cognitive elite option at Highly Respected Substack. And that's at highly-respected.substack.com. And make sure you sign up for the cognitive elite questions while you're there. So the first questions, there's two of them, and they deal with the Supreme Court's decision over Roe v. Wade. So I'm going to go into them. I'm probably gonna spell them out, both questions as they were sent. The first question comes from Jack. He asks, "Hi Scott, with the recent SCOTUS memo leak, many people are questioning how this will affect the 2022 midterms. I've seen some say that it will cause a massive surge for Democrats, while others say it will actually help Republicans. Few even said that it will have no effect. What is your take on this, and which of these do you think will happen?" So that's the first one. That's primarily what I'm going to address, but I need to bring up the second one as well. The second question comes from Mr. B. He asks, "Some are pearl clutching about the SCOTUS leak being a breach of norms or whatever, but the leaker will inevitably be revealed and immediately become a folk hero on the left, losing her legal career in exchange for a media career. I like the assumption that it's a woman. I think that's a very good assumption. Cognitively Q. What goofy but punchy cliche like 'Nevertheless She Resisted' will be the title of her six-figure book deal, which must be already underway?" So both these are great questions to address. So, I mean, the real questions are, the first one is about the political implications of the SCOTUS leak and what will happen if, Supreme Court actually sticks to reversing Roe v. Wade. And the second is about the nature of the leaker and who it is and how they will benefit from this. And it's likely a she. I like that assumption. I share that assumption as well. When it comes to the political implications, so far the polling doesn't show much of a change. There's a new polling showing testing enthusiasm after the leak, and Republican enthusiasm slightly increased. So did Democrat enthusiasm, but there's still a wide gap between the two, as it was before, and people are looking at this enthusiasm gap as a reason why the Republicans are going to do very well in the midterms. So it looks to have, from the polling we're already seeing, to have no impact so far. But that can change, because a lot of the people, it's a theoretical question right now. They don't see this as actually going through a ban. Roe v. Wade, it's a complex matter. It's not as simple, clear cut. I mean, I think people realize it's not a full ban, or it's like, what's going to happen? It really has to come down to what these state legislatures do, and whether there are going to be full bans in 13 states, 5 states, 20 states, where are these bans going to take place, and how it plays out as a fight. And that's where it's really key. So far, I would say this, if it would have no impact if the Supreme Court goes through with the Roe v. Wade ban. About a few very conservative states like Alabama, Mississippi, Wyoming, they ban abortion pretty much elsewhere in more battleground states. They still have, it's very much more limited abortion, but it's still there. I don't think it's going to have much of an impact. The heartbeat bill in Texas doesn't seem to, prior to the Supreme Court decision, wasn't really motivating liberals. It wasn't promoting a corporate backlash, which that's always a real reason that people decide to oppose an issue, is that if there's a major corporate backlash and they're like, oh, I'm going to lose my job, the company's going to move or whatever, and they feel like it's so wrong. I mean, this happened with the religious freedom bills in the mid 2010s where everyone's for them, but then corporations like, we're going to boycott you, we're going to leave if you push this through, and then all these lawmakers got cold feet. Corporations aren't doing that with at least the heartbeat bills. We'll have to see with a full ban. Now, when it comes to the matter of the full ban, I need to bring up a very important subject on this, is that there are 13 states with so-called trigger laws where if the laws that are on the books are saying if Roe v. Wade is overturned, then the state immediately bans abortion. And it's a pretty surprising list of states. I mean, there are some states that you would expect, like Mississippi, Arkansas, but there are some surprising ones where it can be an interesting political issue for the midterms if they go with a full ban. Of the 13 where it'll be interesting to see if they go with a full ban are Kentucky, Louisiana, Missouri, and maybe Tennessee. And definitely Texas. Definitely Texas will be, probably Texas is going to be the number one of all of the important states. I mean, the other ones like Arkansas, not there. Alabama's not on the list, but Alabama tried to do a full ban in 2019. I don't. It's not going to be a political issue in Alabama, and a couple of other states. I mean, North Dakota, Oklahoma. I don't think these are going to be that is going to matter that much there, but it will matter in Kentucky, Louisiana, Missouri, and Tennessee, maybe to a lesser extent, but definitely in Texas. With Kentucky and Louisiana, you may say, but those are very conservative states. Those have Democrat governors, and the Louisiana governor tries to be much more pro-life than the rest of his party, but he's not going to go along with a full ban. I believe he recently signed a heartbeat bill into law, which that seems, as I want to show, that doesn't seem to be that politically problematic for Republicans. But a full ban, that's a little bit different. And also, these full bans, I'd rather say this. Republican politicians have changed on this issue so much is that they no longer want to grant exceptions, which is very different when I was growing up in the 90s and 2000s. I remember all of these Republican politicians, the standard line was they grant exceptions, which was rape, incest, or in the case of the mother's life, they would support abortion. I think they still support in case of the mother's life, but they have dramatically opposed the rape and incest exceptions. The full bans like that are not politically popular. Alabama, when they had the full ban, they passed it in 2019. Polling showed that only about 12 to 14% of Americans supported it. That's very low. And even among Alabamians, it was only, I think, around 30% or so that actually supported this. And Alabama is one of the reddest states in the country. And when only about a third of them are supporting this measure, it may have some political implications coming from that. Now, when it comes to these battleground states, as I said, pretty much everyone except for really Texas are solid red now. Missouri used to be a battleground state, but over time it's become a reliably red state. In 2012, it was considered a very important battleground state. So it was, as it was in 2016. They still had a Democrat senator in 2018. Then it was one of these important states that they were fighting over in the 2018 so-called blue wave, where they still lost a Democrat. But that measure can possibly impact those elections. They have a big Senate race upcoming this year. They could have Eric Greitens as the candidate. Greitens, he has been accused of canceling women and not being very nice to women. And so this may impact his election chances, or whoever they have, it still may impact it. It may be, it's not such of a Republican dominated state where, it's like Alabama, where unless you're running Roy Moore, there is no chance of a Democrat winning. There is still a slight chance of a Democrat winning. And, the abortion issue could make up in the margins there. And I don't even know what could happen in Kentucky and Louisiana because they do have, Democrat governors. I don't know how the trigger laws will work that they could maybe override them, but we will see. And when it comes to Tennessee, Tennessee is a little bit different from Missouri, but it has the chance to become a battleground state over time. They don't have a big. Well, they do have a governor's race, but it doesn't appear to be close at all. I'm not hearing any reports about it. Well, the Missouri Senate race seems to be Democrats feel like they have a chance to win it. I don't necessarily buy that, but they do believe that they can win it. The real battle is going to come to Texas, which Texas, if they go with the immediate ban, then it's going to be a big political issue there. I think the only statewide race they have this year is the governor's race, so it's not going to impact the Senate races, but that could make Beto O'Rourke the governor of the state. That's a terrifying thought, but I mean, he's the one running. I don't know how likely that is, but that is an issue where it could flip. I mean, Texas, it is at the margins there. It is a major battleground state that will possibly move suburbanites over to the Democrat column if they feel that the Republicans are taking this away. A lot of these, it depends, but I do think that the political implications will be beneficial for Democrats if a lot of these battleground states decide to take it up, but especially a lot of areas where the suburbanites were moving away from Republicans, but they're now moving back due to the terrible policies of Biden. And I'm thinking of Georgia, especially in North Carolina, maybe Michigan and Wisconsin, a couple of all these places. A lot of these places don't have Democrat governors, but they have Republican legislatures, and they may just push through an abortion ban, even though they know it's going to be vetoed, as a way to appeal to the pro-life movement. And the governor vetoes it, and that could have major negative political implications for Republicans in these races. I mean, the real thing for Republicans, if they want to be smart, if they want to try these bans, whether it's a heartbeat bill or a full-on ban, is to wait till after the election. But they may just be too eager beaver and go for it, whatever they want beforehand. And I don't know how that's going to play out. And there's also going to be, that's going to cause infighting within the Republicans, because there's going to be some Republican governors are not going to push through this, like Youngkin. Youngkin is definitely not going to push through any type of ban in his state. He ran on running away from the issue in Virginia. That's probably what helped him win, is by not talking about the issue. And it's the same in other states as well. I mean, I think in state where Trump barely won in North Carolina, there's a big Senate race there. The Senate candidate who's endorsed by Trump is a full supporter of, or is a supporter of a full ban with no exceptions. If actually North Carolina pursues that, that may hurt him. They have a Democrat governor there, so it's not going to be voted into law, but it's still an issue that they can campaign on and make up the margins. If there's a 2% difference between the Republican and Democrat, this is an area where that can flip from, that 2% to the other guy. And that's something to keep in mind with this. I think Republicans just have to be smart about going about this issue. If they pursue heartbeat bills and other things, of limiting it and restricting it, but, it's still sort of there. I guess theoretically it's still available to people. I don't think it's to be a major issue, but once you go with a full ban, no exceptions, that gets into territory that it could have a massive impact. I'm not fully sold on the idea that if they went with full bans, that would dramatically impact the election and, would have a landslide in favor of the Democrats. I'm not sold on that. I do think it will make a difference in some of these battleground states. Whether it makes a difference in that it will wipe out any of the gains Republicans may make, that this election that we thought was going to be a red wave is actually going to turn out into, a blue wave, I don't necessarily think so, but it will. I do think if they do pursue these full bans in the battleground states, I do think if you just look at the polling, regardless of whether you view whatever you view on this on the subject is, it will probably have a negative impact. How much of a negative impact? I'm not quite sure of, and it'll be a marginal negative impact, but in states like Texas, North Carolina, Georgia, Florida, even, uh, and even Wisconsin, Michigan, the standard battleground states, it could have enough of impact to make the difference in these key elections and potentially alter the chances of Republicans doing well in the midterms, where, instead of them taking back Congress, we're left with a Congress with a very minimal Democrat majority, and it's due to this issue. Now, some people may say that, like, well, that's a worthy thing to sacrifice in favor of banning abortion. That could be true in your opinion. But when it comes to political implications, I think people need to acknowledge that. And I think it's like, it makes no real difference if you waiting, 6 months, because I mean, they're likely going to issue their order in June. Waiting 6 months to go through these bans after the election versus, doing it before the election, I don't think that it's has any real difference. You just wait till it's a more politically opportune time to do this, where you can just ban it, then see how Democrats react over the next 2 years. Maybe they forget about it and it has no real political downsides to you, and you reward your base. But I do think some people are going to just be too eager and try to do it before the elections. On the part that it may get more people out to vote for Republicans, I don't really believe that. It's going to definitely energize the activist base and make sure that they are maybe volunteering and getting people out there. But I mean, that can have turnout, but it's not necessarily there's these apathetic people who are a large degree of apathetic people who are strongly pro-life and will go out and vote on these issues. Those people are already activated and are voting Republican. Now, it's a matter of getting that, whether they're going to volunteer and really show some effort into the campaign. And doing this, they may show more effort. The one thing to worry about is that it may activate apathetic pro-choice people, because there's so many of these like young girls and just like young people in general who, they don't vote, they don't care about politics. I mean, they just care about sports. I mean, it's like the Barstool sports guy who was going on about this issue. Dave Portnoy, he had a pro-choice message saying that, like, these are one of those issues where I'll just vote for Democrat regardless of how shitty of a job they'll do. I'll just vote Democrat. That may just be to him because he likes having a lot of promiscuous sex and he wants to ensure those women don't have his child. Maybe the real case while he's doing that. But I think that does the type of audience for that, the Barstool viewers, even though there's been this notion of Barstool conservatism, where the whole purpose of the right is now just to own the libs and be anti-political correctness, but it eschews social conservatism. This is not an issue to win those people over. How many of those people are there, and how they may remember this issue by the time of the midterms, or whether they'll be that important of a voting bloc, that is a real question. But I think when it comes to women, young women who are rather apolitical, apathetic, they may have had a black square after George Floyd, but they forget to show up on election day, they're drunk or whatever. They may be activated to vote in the election. This may get Democrats to bolster their youth turnout in an election that looks like it's going to have a low youth turnout, and that youth turnout will come out in favor of Democrats because they want to defend their abortion and their birth control. And that's another big political implication, is that for whatever reason, some Republicans want to get into the matter of, we need to also ban contraceptives. And I'm like, once again, regardless of your view on the matter, only about 2% Americans support outlawing contraceptives. It's an extremely unpopular issue. You may have more popularity by saying you want to bring back slavery or something than that. I mean, clearly different issues on the coin. Not saying that they're equal. I'm just saying that this is like the level of public support for it. And if you get into that weeds of that issue, they're going to run hard with that. I remember in 2013 when in the Virginia gubernatorial race that year between Ken Cuccinelli and Terry McAuliffe. Cuccinelli was Republican, Terry McAuliffe was a Democrat. McAuliffe was the one who lost to Youngkin last year in Virginia gubernatorial race. all the ads in Northern Virginia were about how Cuccinelli is going to ban birth control and ban abortion. It was like all directed to the young awfuls in the area who, want to ensure that their birth control is maintained, and that is their number one issue. And that was a very close race, and likely that issue was able to go into the favor of Democrats. And it'll definitely do the same here. They're going to see a ton of ads about how Republicans want to ban birth control and contraceptives, and that's not going to be a political winner for Republicans. Once again, this is just looking at the issue from, regardless of your views, this is just looking at it from the political implications. And yeah, it's there's not a groundswell of support for banning birth control, but a lot of these guys get into that issue because of pro-life. A lot of the pro-life movement is very open in that they want to ban birth control as well and limit contraceptives. So that will also become a tricky political situation for Republicans if they get involved in that. And so yeah, I do think that is one risk of it, but I think. So it all depends on what Republicans decide to do if the Roe v. Wade goes into place. And there's always even the question of whether the Supreme Court will actually go with the leaked draft written by Samuel Alito. There is a ton of pressure and harassment and an unprecedented harassment campaign going against the Supreme Court right now there was a time, I pointed this out on Twitter, last year in 2021, there was some protests outside Kavanaugh's house, and leading Senate Democrats and Republicans both came together to issue a joint condemnation of the protests outside his house and said that protesting outside his house was beyond the pale. This is not something we do in our democracy. We got to respect the norms. Just a few months later, I think this happened in September 2021, so less than a year, all the lead Democrats and even the Biden administration is snarking about where people protest. Jen Psaki is like, we don't tell where people need to protest. Like, what are you, an idiot? So they're all supporting mass protests outside the house and mass harassment against them. There is some lukewarm condemnation of violence today, but they're not going to care, and they're supporting protests at churches and vandalism at churches and vandalism of pro-life groups. So there is going to be a weird level of violence that's going to be directed at these Supreme Court justices. I don't think they'll change their minds. I think they've already were aware of these consequences and they'll stick to them. I think it's going to, the three you have to worry about are Kavanaugh, Barrett, and Gorsuch. You'd even be surprised by Barrett, but she is a woman, so I don't know how committed she might be to the cause. I think she would stay to it. And yeah, I don't think they'll change, but there is a massive pressure campaign to it. And there is the chance of actual violence being visited on the Supreme Court justice, where them as a person, where they're incapacitated or maybe even they die as a result of this violence upon them. And that opens up a whole new can of worms that this situation may cause. I do feel like the left is very much emboldened to pressure the pro-life movement and these justices by any means necessary. And they understand that the authorities are going to look the other way or cheer them on. And they may do things that we've never really witnessed before. And it could create a very chaotic situation in our country. People want to say accelerationist, this may be good. No, it could be really bad because there could be a chance where they just get to replace a Supreme Court justice with some leftists, and Republicans don't really do anything about it, and then they just go back to watching the NFL when that starts in September, and we move on. And it's not like there's an accelerating process from Republicans, an equal response to it, or some strong response like they get rid of the norms. Instead, they just complain about how incivility is ruining our country, and we all need to come together. And they all come together to put Merrick Garland on the Supreme Court or something. And so you really do have to. That's one case where people always say worse is better is actually worse. Most of the time, it's just worse. So you should be worried about that. This is I don't know where they're going to take what trajectories there is going to happen. But if the Supreme Court does issue fully going with overturning Roe v. Wade, You will see, not on the same level as George Floyd riots, because you're not really going to get inner city blacks to come out and riot for that, but you will see Antifa organizing and utilizing the type of abilities that this state has allowed them to develop to go into a very violent, very dark mode where the authorities aren't going to respond to it. And that could be very scary time for America. So that's something that people need to look out for. But I think they're going to stay with it. I mean, that now goes into the next question that was brought up by Mr. B for the Cognitive Elite, is like, who is the leaker and what's the name of the leaker's book is going to be. I mean, I don't have a witty title yet for it. It is going to be something like Moment of Truth or something like that, or whistleblowing against evil. I mean, or something of that, is speak no evil or speak no evil. It's like, I was supposed to remain silent because I was a woman and these misogynists were ready to take my rights away, but I used my power and freedom to strike back at these evil men. And absolutely, whoever this person is, they are trying to say it's like conservatives who are behind this. And the same way that they, like the DHS and the mainstream media is like concerned, is like the federal authorities worry that pro-life activists and the right will now commit violence. And it's like, why would they commit violence? They're getting what they want. Like, that doesn't happen. It's like, oh, now that they've gotten what they want, there's going to be an escalation of violence. It's totally ignoring the people who had actually committing the violence and just pretending they're pro-lifers, like blowing up their own churches and facilities. I don't think that's happening. And it's the same with the leakers. Like, oh, I think it was a conservative clerk who leaked it. I was like, why would a conservative clerk leak it? I mean, maybe the only reason is that they wanted to, get out the draft and make sure that some of these justices who may be wishy-washy stick to the course. I mean, that's the only argument, but I don't really necessarily believe that, because conservative law clerks who are on first of all these law clerks are very risk averse, especially the conservative ones. They did everything right. They made sure that they didn't have a controversial record in college or in law school. They checked off all the boxes. And they know after their clerkship is done that their legal career is extremely promising. They're going to get a very nice salary from the top law firms in the country, whichever one they choose. And having a clerkship under the belt is one of the best things you can have on your resume as a lawyer. If probably the best thing it is the best thing you can have as a young lawyer. And they got their whole life ahead of them. They're not going to risk that to send out to leak a memo for some intricate, for some draconian, like it's not draconian, but for some intricate political reason. I don't think that's going to be the case. The people who would feel it's more justified are the liberal ones, because they feel that the rules don't apply to them, especially in a case where, oh, this is an unprecedented case. This is a threat to our freedom, that we're living in a tyranny and there's democracy as a threat. I have to do the unprecedented, which the media and the Democrats justify this all the time when they justify violence. They justify, the incredible, they justify the incredible sentencing that they're handing down to J6 protesters, where they lock them up for months for nonviolent crimes. And they go, and even like the unprecedented moves that Democrats want to hold with these hearings that they have against Republicans, they always will, the ends justify the means for them. And they have no moral compunctions about violating norms if it's for the sake of democracy or the sake of freedom or whatever buzzword they want to use. And the people who are most likely to do this are probably women, because generally women also believe that the norms and rules don't apply to them, and that they're doing a brave thing because it's my freedom. And they know that there's a double standard in society that's unwilling to punish women for doing things that men are doing things that if a man did, they would be punished severely. So I do buy into this theory that it's most likely a female liberal law clerk who did this, who feels that she had to do this to be a hero. If she does decide to come out, and I likely believe it's a she, this could be very, bad, proven wrong over time when it turns out to be he. Maybe even a he conservative law clerk, but I don't believe that. But when it comes out as a she, if she ever got revealed, she would immediately be turned into a folk hero. all the media would be celebrating her, and they would be outraged that anyone would try to punish her. They would actually be very happy if anyone tried to publish her, and of course they would publish her book. She would be turned into a star for doing this, and it'd be like, you did the right thing. This is what was necessary to do, and they'll cite like Martin Luther King or Sojourner Truth or whatever civil rights hero to say like this was necessary. You don't need to follow the laws and the rules. They don't apply to you when democracy is on the line. So they'll use that line, and I think women are most likely to believe that and believe the rules don't apply to them, and they're not going to face a swift punishment, and they could just go on through life. As I want to make it clear, is like a lot of women, when they do things in the workplace or in life in general, they get a slap on the wrist, if that. It comes down to even speeding tickets. Like, no guy can ever hope to get off of a speeding ticket, but a cute woman can. And it can be the same here. It's like, oh, I didn't know what I was doing, or I was so worried about my rights. They're like, oh, that's okay. And the top law firm will still hire them, and they'll get their big salary, and then they'll get a 6-figure, maybe even a 7-figure book deal. And they'll get plaudits in the media and stuff, so their life will go on. And yeah, the norms will be sacrificed for it. There is a theory that it's actually Sonia Sotomayor. I actually think that's a very persuasive case. She is very stupid, and she feels that the rules are white supremacy, and she doesn't need to worry about her career. She's never going to be impeached for doing this. So she'll just send it along and realize there's no consequences for it. And she's just doing it to be, very rude to her compatriots on the Supreme Court. So that's what it is with that. I think the leaker will come out someday. The clerks who are working for the court right now, their term ends this summer. And maybe one will just come out and be like, I was the one who leaked. Once they realize the law firm is never going to fire them, and there's going to be no consequences for it, and it's likely going to be I would bet money that it's a liberal female clerk. So those are my thoughts on that. And now to the third Connolly question. We've got a lot today, as I said. This is on a slightly different subject. This is on the subject of Madison Cawthorn, who's had some issues lately, and this comes from Cargo Shorts Respecter. He says, "Hi Scott, what do you think about Madison Cawthorn's leaked video? Closeted gay cripple or harmless frat bro prank?" I'm actually of the latter opinion. One thing we got to keep in mind about Madison Cawthorn, well, there's two things. One, Republicans view him as an embarrassment because he says things that they don't like, such as him calling Zelensky a thug, opposing the Ukraine stuff, bringing up the cocaine orgies. I don't know if that was necessarily true. I actually believe that somebody had just invited him to a swinger party. Swingers are a very common feature in Republican politics, weirdly enough. There is a surprising amount of them, and he may have just been confused by it being an orgy, and likely maybe cocaine was offered him. I don't know the full story with that. He unfortunately didn't offer any evidence to back that up, but maybe some type of situation like that occurred, and maybe he probably exaggerated it or misinterpreted some of what he was being offered. But that's it. He's just saying things that they don't like. He defends the J6 protesters and all these things that the Republicans don't want him to do. And he says a lot of things that people want to be said by their politicians, but most Republicans don't. But he, at the same time, is a massive idiot. Even when he says good things, and I think these leaks kind of prove it. Is this a closeted gay man? I don't think so. This is more really stupid roughhousing among guys, being guys. It's still very weird, but it's more that really stupid drunk guys oh, I'm humping you in the face. It's like the teabagging. It's if you guys aren't familiar with teabagging, I'd recommend you look it up. It may be too inappropriate for our discussion, but I would say it relates to a man usually passed out and one of his friends, and he's dropping his balls on the guy's face. Sometimes even at a worse spot. But guys do this weird, gross shit among each other. Sometimes it may be a little on the gay side coming to this, but it goes back to the hazing stuff that I was talking about last week. Once again, I'm not like celebrating this stuff, but there's like just weird shit that guys do amongst themselves. If you played team sports in high school, I remember like the wrestling team. I was fortunately not on the wrestling team, but they did some weird shit among themselves. And guys have been doing this for all the time. There's always like this like way of testing of like, hey bro, it's not gay, or just dudes being dudes. And sometimes you gotta like limit that stuff, obviously, but it's generally the dumbest ones among them who are gonna take it too far. Where like Madison Cawthorn is butt ass naked and humping his friend in a way of like fucking with him, which is like some things that are like unfortunately common among guys when they're left to their own devices and stuff. And if you want to look at like closeted gay behavior, like all these gay guys came onto Twitter and they're like, absolutely, that's not the stuff that we do. We'd be horrified by that because we're trying not to show that we're gay. And generally, we had some like gay guys in our fraternity. Like every fraternity always has like one or two guys in the closet. And the way that they interact with men is not like doing this roughhousing, like teabagging and stuff, and just like the dudes being dudes. It's usually that they have a really strong, strange relationship with other men where they like gravitate towards them and they latch onto them and they act like this person is their girlfriend and stuff. And it's like very weird. And you can generally tell by their mannerisms and stuff and how they talk. And it's very effeminate, which I don't think Madison Cawthorn is very effeminate at all. He's like almost too stupid to be in the closet. If he was like actually in the closet, he would be acting way more flamboyantly gay because he's like not smart enough to hide it. But due to his stupidity, that's probably is helping him from these accusations of how being flamboyant. There was like a congressman a few years ago who is a Republican congressman a few years ago who was very in the closet, Aaron Schock, who dressed very flamboyantly. He did it. He spent all this money to make his office look like Downton Abbey. He did things that were definitely, it's like, this is a gay man doing this stuff. But I think Cawthorn is like, too much caveman to really understand this. So I really think it's just more of him just being drunk and taking dudes being dudes way too far. It is still weird, but it's also like hilarious that this is like the blackmail on him. It's like, look at like this 22, and most of this stuff is like from when he's like in his early 20s. Is like, look at this guy, he's like 22 years old being a drunk frat bro idiot, and this is why he can't be in Congress. And I understand that point. It'll be really funny if he wins. I think no matter what your thoughts are on hump gay, whatever you want to call it, I think you would want him to win, because the reason why the establishment is coming after him is because they don't like what he says and they view him as a threat, and they want somebody more squishy establishment Republican who follows the establishment line in there, rather than Madison Cawthorn, who can go off the rails and say things that no one else is going to say, because his IQ doesn't prevent him from stopping his mouth, which can be very base at times. So that is my thoughts on Cawthorn. And yeah, I would say it's more just really idiotic roughhousing than a sign of a closeted gay man. And that is the conclusion to this episode. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and especially Irk's takes on what's going on Ukraine. We're going to have another incredible, highly respected next week, and another incredible IQ supplement this week. So tune in for that. And so until next time, stay respected.